World War II review, not a remaster, but it might as well be. Call of Duty World War II isn't a remaster, but it feels like one. As the gate crashed open on my landing craft, and I sprinted desperately onto Omaha Beach, I half expected to hear people yelling for Lieutenant Powell, star of 2002's Medal of Honor, Allied Assault, the first game I remember, doing the iconic D-Day opener. This one stars a Davis instead, but that's no big deal. 15 years on, Call of Duty World War II is less World War II as it actually existed, and more World War II as it existed in video games between 1999 and 2008-ish, a greatest hits collection spanning from the original Medal of Honor through to Allied Assault, and eventually Call of Duty 1, 2, and 3. It was the decade where everyone got sick of World War II games, but absence does indeed make the heart grow at least a little fonder. Everything in moderation is not the games industry's strong suit, which I guess is why we tend to get ideas in waves. We do sci-fi to death in the 90s, so everyone moves on to World War II. Then we do World War II to death, so we move on to modern war. That gets stale, we return to science fiction. And voila, 15 or 20 years later we're reloading our M1 Garens. And if Call of Duty World War II is the start of a World War II renaissance, it's about the safest bet you could make. Dredging up the all D-Day to VE Day storyline once again, from June of 1944 through to April of 1945, it's the same band of brothers Saving Private Ryan story video games love to focus on. We've seen it in Allied Assault, in multiple Call of Duty games, in Gearbox's underrated Brothers in Arms series, and so on. So if you played games between 1999 and 2008-ish, this'll feel very familiar. Omaha Beach? Check. Normandy's hedgerows? Check. Hill 400? Check. Battle of the Bulge? Check. All the usual highlights. It's safe. It's also kind of bland. Davis and his pals breezed through Normandy on the backs of the most generic platitudes. Davis has a wife back home in Texas. He wants to head home to her but, spoilers, decides duty comes first. Sergeant Pearson has a dark past involving tough command decisions. He's also an alcoholic. Your friend Zussman ends up being the most fleshed-out character, and that depth literally goes as deep as he's part Jewish and fighting Nazis. Pearson is the absolute worst when it comes to hoary old soldiering life cliches. Call of Duty World War II has nothing to add to our understanding of World War II, nothing to say that hasn't been said by dozens of its predecessors. It doesn't even feel like it's trying to say something more interesting. As I said, it's content to be a sort of World War II video game greatest hits collection. The difference, of course, is that we've had a dozen or so Call of Duty games and a generation or two of hardware since last we saw these locales. Call of Duty World War II is stunning. It's a case, as with remasters, of a new game looking like I remember the old, not how it actually looked. Sprinting between hedgehogs on D-Day, the water bursting around me, the plink 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 of a German machine gun tapping on barricades, then up and over the earthworks, storming the bunkers full of Nazis. It looks like I remember Allied Assault looking, brings back that same adrenaline rush. Then I look at how Allied Assault actually looked and, oh, pictured, definitely not Allied Assault. The same is true of Virgin Forest and the rest. Ideas that were only hinted at in the past can now be fully realized. For instance, the way artillery shreds a 50-foot pine tree, turns it into 6-inch chunks of shrapnel. Trees, and limbs and houses and so on, explode in World War II in a way they didn't and couldn't in 2005. Maybe that's enough. Technological advances perhaps highlight how little Call of Duty's progressed in other respects, but only to those who were here for the World War II game glut the first time around. There's an entire new generation of people playing games now who have never played something like Call of Duty World War II. And for those of us who were there, the nostalgia is still real. Hearing the ping of an emptied M1 Garand, seeing that familiar gray-green color grading, hearing the rumble of panzers coming over a hill, I missed it. Side note, World War II also features Call of Duty's best behind enemy lines stealth mission since Chernobyl. Hell, Sledgehammer's even taken this throwback one step further, eschewing rechargeable health in favor of medkits, the first time since Call of Duty 2. In terms easier to grasp, that means it's the first time Call of Duty has used medkits for health since before the release of the Xbox 360. Multiplayer feels just as retro, at least by 2017 standards. I don't typically spend much time talking about Call of Duty's multiplayer, in part because the last few iterations just haven't appealed to me much at all. But I found myself playing and